I've spoken before to a man called Daniel Lukowitz. He's a security expert and the CEO of Calamity Monitoring, which is a security and life safety entity. Today in the Daily Telegraph in Sydney, Daniel Lukowitz has joined the stadium rebuilding debate from a security angle. And he writes in part, quote, anyone who's ever attended a crowded event at Allianz Stadium knows that getting out at the end of it was difficult. That is, with an orderly crowd, in the absence of any particular danger. Now imagine people in panic, and it becomes obvious why the stadium needs to change. This is over and above well-known fire safety issues. Daniel Lukowitz writes that now the stadium is no longer in use, we can discuss these issues without giving ideas to would-be terrorists. Daniel Lukowitz is on the line. Daniel, good morning.
Good morning, Alan.
Thank you for your time. What prompted you to write this?
Alan, this is very obviously a political issue, and it's not one that has any basis in actual commercial sense. We're talking about spending money on hospitals instead of stadiums, or whether or not it needs to be rebuilt. Now, obviously, you're close to this because you're on the board of the SCG Trust, and I would expect that you've read papers and briefings that you're not allowed to discuss. But I look at this purely from a security point of view, and I realise that there is an accident that is absolutely waiting to happen. Now, next month marks 30 years since the Hillsborough tragedy occurred, and most of your listeners will remember watching on live television as people who just went out for an ordinary day at the match got crushed to death and lost their lives. Now, we use words like panic and stampede, and you just did in the intro, and I did in my article, but the truth of what actually happens in crowd crushes is a lot less dramatic than that. And it's very simply that when you have a sea of humanity walking in one direction, and they don't have to be running, they don't have to be screaming, they don't have to be in a stampede, they just simply need to be moving. And a person trips and falls over, or they bump into a gate that's closed, or they go the wrong way, all of a sudden there is an immovable force against them, and people die of crush asphyxia. Now, this is not the stuff of fantasy. There's a fantastic resource online. I've linked to it via an article on my website, and it lists hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of fatalities around the world caused because of this. And right now we have the opportunity of doing something before there's a major disaster rather than getting in a real political finger-pointing exercise afterward. Mm-hmm. The thing that has frustrated me about this is that I really think it's come away from what is the actual problem with the stadium.
Well, only with one person who's now told lies about it. I mean, you've made these very valid points, which we didn't make for obvious reasons. You don't want to be encouraging terrorists by saying that if there was such a thing as a terrorism attack or something, that people were trying to, or shooting, or a bombing, and people suddenly try to get out of it, then away you go. Now, you talk about in February, 2 women were crushed to death when a Kuala Lumpur indoor market was giving away 200 free buffet vouchers, and 1,000 people didn't want to miss out. And you said a less dramatic version could be seen at Town Hall Station around 5:30. That same sort of crush. Multiply, you say, that physical force by 10 or 100, and the problem becomes obvious. Nor is it confined to the third world. You said at the Global Citizen event in Central Park, New York last year, a barricade fell over and the noise was mistaken for gunfire, causing panic and confusion as 60,000 fans headed for the exit, except those global citizens standing around filming it for social media. Fortunately, there were no walls. I mean, this is the issue, isn't it?
Well, Alan, and unfortunately you can't just say, oh, well, let's have big, wide exit doors that open out into a courtyard, because that creates additional problems of vehicle ramming attacks and, you know, the need to have crowds and queues. There's a simple test that someone can do. Imagine yourself leaving a crowded concert or a crowded game and then suddenly realising you'd left your car keys on the seat behind. Now try turning back and going against that crowd. It physically can't be done. Coming back to the politics of the matter, I think it's fair to say that if Alan Jones wanted to save the stadium, you'd have certain people signing up for a bulldozer's licence and changing their view completely. Correct, so I want to bring the debate away from the politics and who's on the board and who wants this gone and who wants it to stay, and just come back to very, very simple questions that too many people aren't asking, which is it safe? If not, why not? And based on a whole lot of modern research that exists now, that didn't exist when that stadium was built, when Hillsborough was built, we know that it simply isn't. So we've got a really nice opportunity to fix the problem rather than have to explain why a whole lot of people lost their lives just by going to a casual day out.
Good on you. You've said, as a security professional, I would hate to see a preventable incident take place, followed by finger pointing as to how it could have been avoided. When the answer is blindingly obvious, this is why I find the current argument over rebuilding the obviously dangerous Allianz Stadium so appalling. Just reiterate what you mean exactly again by that.
Well, Alan, you can't completely eliminate risk. And I understand that bad things will happen and people will get injured from time to time. So I'm not going to simply say, oh my gosh, someone's going to die, something has to be done. But this entire debate has been railroaded because there was obviously confidential advice that was given, and anyone who knows anything about security that's worked at the stadium or been there knows the problems well and truly. They're pretty obvious.
Absolutely.
And you know, I appreciate that you're probably restrained from discussing.
Well, we are restrained, although we have minuted all of this. This is all minuted in the minutes of the Trust meetings available for government. And we have tried to brief successive governments over the very issues that you are talking about. I mean, you write today, debate is raging over pill testing in an apparent attempt to save the lives of people who've engaged in an entirely voluntary way to kill yourself. Michael Daly said New South Wales Labor would explore pill testing if elected, whereas nobody's ever volunteered to be crushed to death, yet this is entirely predictable, and Daly apparently is okay with that. You're talking security and safety, aren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, look, if you were thinking about it from a political point of view, why would you rebuild a perfectly good stadium when you could go and build a new one and pick up some new votes? So I don't believe the demolition was being done for political reasons, but the blocking of the destruction of a potentially dangerous facility is being done for political reasons. Definitely. And I think that's playing fast and loose with people's lives.
Indeed. I mean, you write how modern software allows stadium designers to what-if the effects of a well-behaved, nervous or fleeing crowd against exits, immovable obstacles such as walls and, of course, other human beings. In other words, what you're saying is, you know what happens now with modern software when an unstoppable, your words, an unstoppable tsunami of human bodies moves in a particular direction.
Right. So when there's been a crowd crush, so the one everybody's familiar with is, for example, the Hillsborough Stadium. After all the mess was cleaned up and they'd actually looked at steel railings or walls that had been bent, it was observed that there were forces of over 500 kilos against them. So imagine being a medium-sized person or a child and being pressed against a steel or brick wall and having 500 kilos pressing up behind you. You literally can't breathe. So it's not like a movie scene where you have a stampede of bulls running against you and people screaming and freaking out. And similarly, when we talk about terrorism, you might have a person with a firearm who could kill a handful of people, but hundreds and hundreds could subsequently get injured or hurt simply by people trying to leave the scene. And the crazy thing is, you don't even need an actual terrorist act, a shooting, a bombing, what have you. As you saw in New York, or as you see every year at the Hajj pilgrimage in Mecca, you just need someone to get spooked, a loud noise, people get scared, people think there's a problem. And they just start casually walking with the crowd. Now, they're not running, they're not scared, they're just casually walking. But what they don't realise is that 30 metres ahead of them, someone's tripped and fallen over. So now the people are just piling on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other, and they're not even stopping. And we can see this happening. And using software, you can say, well, if we put this many people in this many square metres and they walk this way, what would be the effect of it? And then you can add things like, and what happens if 10% of them are intoxicated, or what happens if there's people running the other direction, or what happens if the gate doesn't work. Now, it's very, very difficult to retrofit the solution to that to an existing structure. And that's, of course, why the answer is not a new coat of paint and putting in a few
That's
more
correct.
doors. It's
Yep.
a bulldoze and start
Absolutely.
over again.
Absolutely. You say by any modern assessment, based on research that didn't exist in the early 80s when Allianz was designed, the stadium is a disaster waiting to happen. This is Daniel Lukovitz. Thank you for your time, Daniel. Very grateful.
Thank you, Alan.
Daniel Lukovitz from Calamity Monitoring. He also says this. He concludes his piece today in the Daily Telegraph. Unless Michael Daly stops making this a political issue, he too is a disaster waiting to happen.